Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Ad Hoc Grant Search Committee at 5:37 on January 7th, and we are recording the meeting. We're meeting by Zoom, given all the prohibitions of meeting in person. And we have present Caitlin Rooks, myself, Chris Fowles, Paul Fergal. Is it Fergal or Fergal?
Fergal.
Fergal. That was close. Okay. And then Diana Fetterman. So thanks. And Ed Gibson should be joining us very shortly. So what I wanted to do tonight was to go over a couple of things, but let's start with our usual process about any open time for the public. I'm relatively sure there's nobody hanging out there waiting to join us at the present time. Not seeing anybody. I'd like to skip over any kind of minutes for tonight too, partly because I didn't totally finish them the way I want to. I'm trying to trim them down. They didn't need to be as lengthy as I started out writing my notes. So I'm going to get them ready for our next time, if that's okay. And what I wanted to do was to bring up a couple of documents, if I can try not to lose them. But first of all, since we met last time, so this is basically old business and really just focusing on the applications for the Greenway without any other grant type business, because I think these are our two highest priorities right now, given the short time frame that we have. I did have a meeting, as mentioned to you, that I had put in calls to both the grant leader person for Mass Trails, as well as the person for the Land Water Conservation Grant Program. And magically enough, both of them got back to me. I was just very pleased. So I talked to one, I think, on Tuesday and one on Wednesday. So with that, I jotted my notes down and I wanted to kind of bring those up. So let me see if I can share a screen here. And I'll try this one first. Okay, so let me know if you can see this or if I need to enlarge it a little bit.
Perfect.
Okay, can go a tad bigger if you need, maybe, just in case. There we go. How's that? So basically, I met with this, had a telcon with this Melissa Cryan, who's the person at the LWCF program. And so the discussion with LWCF was basically to talk about how we wanted to sort of approach our grant application. And if you recall, at one point we had thought we would go to them for acquisition. And that was why we actually had to contact her, because the rules were such that any acquisition project had to be in touch with her by December 30th. Luckily, I had emailed her just, I believe it was December 30th. So technically making that deadline of making contact with her. But then since that time, during our subsequent meeting, we had kind of decided that, here comes Ed, just a minute. Yep. Hi, Ed. Okay. Hi, Ed.
Hey, how are you, Chris?
So good.
Yeah.
We're just
Hey.
yeah. Well, and I know you've got another meeting coming up too, so we're going to try and just be relatively succinct on this one and get to a couple of important points first, in case you have to scoot out on us.
No,
My meeting.
they know I'll be late to the next one, so we're fine.
All right. Well, we shouldn't be too long anyway. So basically, what I have on the screen is my notes of a telcon with Melissa Cryan, who's representing the LWCF program. As I was starting to say, we had originally thought we might talk to them about the acquisition grant. And then during our subsequent meeting, we kind of changed strategies and said, no, maybe we'll go to Mass Trails for acquisition and then go to LWCF for something else. But if we were to go for the acquisition one, it was a requirement to talk to this person before we did anything. So I'm just going to kind of go through, and I'll send these notes out to you afterwards. Just kind of go through these notes and I'll kind of read through them if that's basically okay. So basically, I explained the situation to her and told her that we were looking at probably applying to 2 different grant programs. She didn't have any real advice and just said, basically, we need to determine what's the best program and what grant to go for. So that wasn't too helpful to start. She was a little confused about what we were doing with the railway in terms of, the whole right of way, the purchase of the right of way, et cetera. But she finally caught on with that. And just reiterated that the maximum grant was $750,000. And if we did decide to do a straight acquisition request, she really, even though we contacted her right on time, we're really late in the process. Other people have started their grant applications a while ago, and especially for application, there is this whole system where we have to go through an appraiser, as I think I mentioned last time, that has to be following some yellow book standards, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, she said, okay, well, you got a hold of me now, but if you're going to go for acquisition, I need to know who you're going to choose for your appraiser no later than Friday. Now, mind you, I talked to her yesterday, so within 48 hours, she said, I'm willing to, leave it open till then, but you really have to be able to choose an appraiser, and then that appraiser works kind of simultaneously, I guess, with the program's appraiser. So it's a kind of a dual approach to appraising the value of the land acquisition. The cost of that appraiser would be the town's. It is not something that could be in the grant application. And all of that work has to be done by the end of March. And so she was thinking that would be fairly difficult to complete in that amount of time. She did send me a list of certified appraisers, but said that they're often updated so that whenever we're ready to find an appraiser, we need to check with her. And so anyway, that was a little bit of a, put the brakes on at the beginning of the conversation. She also we switched then from the acquisition point to this sort of new development category that they have on their application form. And she basically went into that in a bit more detail, saying that if we decided to do that, that design work by itself is not sufficient. It's not eligible to have design work only. It's got to be design work, or trail design with development, i.e. she kept using the word construction. That's what's eligible. So moving on down, I got the words, more clarity from Paul before the call about, looking at the idea of maybe we would want to go for asking about funding for topographical maps, et cetera. When I talked to her about that, she was saying, well, no, I don't think you want topographical maps. What you need are boundary maps. It's like, okay, well, whatever the term is, this is what we're thinking about is the initial steps on the design. It's some sort of mapping exercise. And she's saying to determine where either the railroad has encroached on people's property or people have encroached on the railroad's property. So she thought that that would be the mapping exercise, but again, stressed that that alone was not sufficient, that the work had to be done over a 2-year time frame. That was the limit on that, so that most applicants know exactly what they want to construct, because we talked about the fact of trying to do any construction per se in that limited 2-year time frame would be pretty challenging unless we said, okay, we're gonna work on the first mile of the trail, for example. She said, yeah, you could kind of do that. She wasn't sure how competitive that would be. Surveys, et cetera, were not enough because basically LWCF wants what she kept calling the amenity. So the thing, right, whether it's the park or the trail or whatever, they want it to be usable as soon as possible. So
And she knew that, I'm sorry, and she knew that the project's been funded by Mass DOT.
Yeah, I brought that up as we got into it. We were talking about that. And so, yeah, she did. And so she said there, and that goes down to the next one, that both CPC funds or Mass Trail funds could be used as the town's share. There is no match per se. It's a 50% reimbursable grant. So if we're already on the tip sheet, which she understood we were now, she didn't know that, I mentioned that to her, we cannot apply for some of the same things it would cover, obviously, but if our costs and activities were above what is allocated by the DOT, we need to be clear what tasks those are, and delineate those very, very clearly as to what we would be asking LWCF for. Okay. And then she gave an example of, if we got $1 million out of the 3 million project, what we could apply for and what we would be reimbursed. But again, stressing that it's not anything more than 50% of whatever we're asking for.
So it sounds like this is not an ideal funding.
Yeah, so I'm getting there, and I'm just going to go through it real quick. So part of the application was there's a fillable PDF. You've got to attach separate pages and send it to her by email. And then there's 2 hard copies that have to be in. The deadline, they've loosened it only for the paper copy. The electronic one has still got to be in on time, but the other one should be postmarked on the 1st if we do that. That needs to be the goal. And this application does need to have these supplemental forms if we're going to go for design, development, construction type projects rather than acquisition. She would have to have the draft town warrant language. She needs to have that language ahead of time to approve it. We need to have put out the letters to natural heritage and endangered species. She understood that if we didn't have a response by the application date, that was something we could not control, but we had to show that we had written a letter to them and we're asking for their input or whatever the letter requires us to do, and that as soon as we got an answer from them, we would have to basically send that on to her. There was a particular question that was kind of fuzzy for me on leases and rights and restrictions, and there she said that even if it was just a straight, well, not if it was a straight acquisition, if we were doing construction, design and construction, this would be things like noting where there are any easement type things that already exist, such as electric lines or anything under the railroad bed that are already having some level of restriction upon them or particular rights. We would have to describe them. So that's what that question was all about. We talked about whether we had a project with a lower cost, lower reimbursement, would that make it any more competitive? And she didn't say that it really was. They haven't gotten all their money yet from the state, or from the feds, wherever it's coming from, National Park Service, I think. So they don't know exactly how much they have yet. They're expecting money. So she said a project with a lower rating that requires less money could jump ahead of a bigger project, but no big guarantees on that. Again, the project would have to be done by December of 2023. And did just mention that climate resiliency is a big focus this year, along with the various other criteria. There's a whole thing called under the SCORP, which is the state community recreation plan, I believe, and it's got all these points for different categories, which I know, Kate, you were trying to go through and fill out and looked at very carefully, and that's in some of the documents in Google Docs as well. So climate resiliency is a big focus this year. I don't know how well we would match that focus. And then basically by the end, it was a half an hour conversation. She was encouraging us to think about the park grant, which isn't due until the summertime, and just thought it would give us more time to think things through. So with that in mind, I am not feeling overly thrilled about spending our time trying to apply for that grant. I don't think right now it's a good fit myself, and it's definitely going to take a lot of effort to pull all the outside pieces together in a pretty short amount of time. So I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there, and then I'll give you the idea about the land, the Mass Trails one in a second. But what are people's first reactions to that kind of a resume?
Well, I don't think there's much choice right now. I mean, based on that they don't like the design or survey. I mean, that doesn't give us any other options.
Yeah. I mean, it can't just be that by itself. And I don't know how we would, be ready to jump into some other phase, so quickly. It doesn't sound like it's doable to me, but I just wanted to be sure. I don't want to make that decision myself. I just want to be sure that everybody sort of sees it the same way I do. I don't know.
If we can,
What are the parameters of the park grant?
It's like
Oh.
400,000. It's $400,000, and it says that it's for acquisition, improvement, or construction of parks. And it's a 52 to 7. Not that I haven't been reading about it a lot, but I think it's a 52 to 70% match.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not due until later on. It's due, I think, in May or June or something like that. So there's definitely more time to do that, which could get us maybe closer to thinking about things like a design phase, you know, if we could work on something else for the acquisition of it and let this LWCF one go, I think.
Are there examples of parks grants funding rail trails?
I haven't had a chance to look at that. I've been focused on these two. So anyway, that's the story on that one. Let me pull up then my notes from the Mass Trails one. And this was with Amanda Lewis that I think you've worked with a bit already, Diana, right?
Yes.
Can I just ask one question about the last? So would making the trail accessible, more accessible, even through, like, I know you said we have funding through the Mass DOT, but would trail construction also include like removal of trees or the rail ties so that it's walkable?
I don't know. I guess construction could be including those kind of things. I would assume that would be part of it, but I mean, we've got, you know, a design phase that we haven't even begun to think of, a survey phase.
I would throw that, I wouldn't suggest we go there because A, timing, B, who knows the environmental contamination impacts associated with that particular phase.
Yeah.
Right.
And especially if you've got creosote right in those old railroad ties, right? So, which I'm sure we do. That's how they made
Well,
them
I'm
back
sure there's
then.
other things in there too. I mean, you know, you do
Exactly.
a phase one assessment at a railroad track, you'll be finding very similar conditions anywhere in the state. You know, that's you're going to find
you
a lot
know,
of coal,
and we do. Yeah, and we do have the environmental survey or study that was done earlier on. I'm thinking that was more the surrounding area, not necessarily the rail bed itself, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I thought they were very hesitant about Pioneer Valley about doing full assessment on their property.
Yeah. Okay. So I think at this point in time, this one does not sound very doable to me without a heck of a lot of work in it. The Mass Trails one, however, looks a lot better. Definitely just confirm that we can apply for more than one grant. She wasn't really even aware that there was a same due date for the LWCF. I had mentioned to her that we were encouraged to apply for this from the DOT or someone at DOT. And she basically said that she wasn't privy to any DOT info. And I kind of got the impression that she didn't want to go there. So we didn't really talk about that anymore because it felt like that was like I was crossing a line somewhere between programs. I'm not quite sure, but she basically said it would be fine to include legal fees along with the acquisition price. We should apply for 80% of our total costs and keep it, well, I guess at or under the 300,000 maximum. She reiterated at least a 20% match is needed. And in the budget template, there is a budget and timeline template. It's an Excel sheet that I've put in the Google Docs folder today. The first sheet of it is the budget. The second sheet of it is the timeline. And I said, well, if this is just an acquisition cost, I mean, we've got literally one, maybe two lines in the budget. So what do we do with this crazy budget format you've all got for us here as the template? And she basically said, we have to keep the format as is. So it's just like everybody else's submission, but we can add a line entitled acquisition. And we're at the same time allowed to erase lines that are not applicable. So there are, you know, different budget lines that are not applicable. We can get rid of those and put in ones that are. she said that she thought personnel was one of those lines that is in there, and that it needed to be needed to be kept in there. But we could hold on. We could go ahead with LWCF was basically to talk about, hold on. Somebody's calling in here. Hold on here. Yeah. Alrighty, I don't know what's going on. Okay, so basically that, hello, yeah. So we could add in a line for under personnel to talk about legal costs. We should try to be as specific as we can as to what those costs would be, but those legal costs could count under the sort of personnel category if we wanted to. The timeline itself was going to be basically the fiscal year. So this would be from July 21 when they would tend to notify their grants. And then, let's see, then I think, yeah, would go for a full year beyond that. So it would go until June of 22 would be the time frame that we would be allowed. We should try to delineate within that time frame some level of milestones. So to say, okay, we're gonna, whatever, we've got to make contact with, the railroad in the month of X. Who knows if there's got to be more approvals back on the railroad side or any other back.
About town approval.
Yeah, town approval. I don't know what we've got to do there. So those kinds of things we've got to try to establish at least a few milestones within there. So Ed, do you think we have to come into town approval on doing anything on this yet? I wouldn't. I mean, not for the application, right?
Well, no, for the scheduling.
Yeah.
We'll
Not for the application, no.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Then you may get into town approval, along with, okay, that 20% match that's needed,
Right.
Do we need to fund that?
Yeah.
Or,
Right.
how do we fund that? Yeah.
Right. And so whether that's,
Yeah.
whether that's CPC funds or we're going to try and budget for it. I mean, just to predict a month when, we would want to do that. So if we would normally have a May town meeting, for example, that could be a milestone or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And we know we can't use CPC funds for the acquisition. So,
Right. So
or the match for the acquisition. So we know that piece.
Right. So that's what's clear. And then just the last couple things, natural heritage and endangered species forms are not required now because this is only an acquisition focus. But we should attach the railroad letter of intent, obviously. And we just talked about areas of the application that sort of seem not applicable. She said what we needed to do, though, was to try and address all the questions that we could with information from other documents that we have. And that we should really, I told her that we had the feasibility study, the environmental study, et cetera. And she said that we really need to summarize relevant parts of the feasibility study as part of our narrative. And they would like to have that document. It's not totally required. And she knows that it's usually a very heavy document to even transmit, probably. So she was suggesting that maybe we could put it in Dropbox or find some other way to transmit it to her. Because she said there's probably somebody on the committee who's going to say, oh, I want to read the feasibility study. She said it's not likely that everybody would, but there's always that one person who wants to touch paper and read something in more depth. And she said of all things she really would advise us is to don't refer to the study and just say, see what's, paragraph on page 25 that talks about whatever, but really give the answers from the study in the application form. So don't make people go and try to read the study, but to try and take the information from the study and where it's relevant, excuse me, and put it in the application form. So that was her best thinking, which I thought was pretty good. So basically, I thought that was pretty encouraging. Certainly if we don't have to have all this other supplemental information, that knocks off days of time as far as I'm concerned. So what is the thinking here? I guess I would like to just formally have us take a vote, maybe for the voting members, of should we go for Mass Trails or LWCF, or do we want to try both? Again, both deadlines are the same. So could either Kate or Ed make a motion on what you're thinking? I've told you.
Make a motion that we proceed with the Mass Trails
Okay. Kate, would you second that?
application.
I'll second that. I mean, of course, it's totally discouraging about the LWCF because of the, the grant amount and the timeline and how it would be really helpful, but it doesn't seem feasible. So I
Okay.
agree, we should focus on the Mass Trails.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my sense is that, even though we know that we're competing again with Manhan Meadows, and, there's a risk. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, we could be lucky and score 2. We could score 1 or the other, or none. So we don't really know. Yep.
Yeah, and the other possibility is they, look at them and say, yeah, this is phase 2 of the Manhan Meadows. We're going to fund that.
Yep.
And, we will have applied this year for, the acquisition to the acquisition portion to the right of way for the Greenway. And, means we end up reapplying next year, and they look at it and said, okay, this is their second year. It scored decently last time. Let's move it up.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's
right.
a couple of ways to look at it.
It's all of the above, really. And I think my feeling is I would rather, to the extent that we've got to put our time and effort in it, I would rather do a great job on 1 rather than being kind of slipshod on 2. So
I agree.
That's my feeling. So with that in mind, could we have a vote? All in favor?
Aye. Aye, Fetterman.
You can't technically vote yet, Diana.
Oh, sorry.
Caitlin Rooks, aye.
Ed?
Gibson, aye.
Yeah, Fowles eye. Okay, so let's do that. We will push LWCF off for future endeavors and focus on that. And I just want to be sure that everybody is able to see the the Mass Trails folder. I have gone in today, and like I say, in Google Docs, there is a Mass Trails folder that has a couple of, it's got the budget timeline template in it. It's got a Word version of the application. And again, this has got to be all translated and filled in online, but I wanted to get us all the verbiage like we did for the first grant we applied for, where we've got all the language and all we've got to do is cut and paste into the online application. And not too much is going to be needed for attachments. We do need the railroad letter. We do need, and you'll see in my comments, I went through the application and added a couple things, but also made comments. They're asking for some maps, for example, or some photos. So maybe, Paul, you and I could take a look in the feasibility study or the environmental study and see where we've got any good maps or photos that we could try to scarf out and be attached to the application. But they really don't need a whole lot of other attachments, which is kind of good. And then probably the biggest thing, the narrative, when you go in and look at it, the narrative that's in there right now is pretty much the one that we used for the first grant application that we did. However, Kate had spent a lot of time putting together the narrative on the LWCF one. And so my thinking is that we kind of need to merge the two, and or take bits and pieces of what was already in the draft of the LWCF one and see where it can fit in best on the questions here. So I'm not totally sure how to proceed. Just to say though that when you go into it, you can click on an area and it will allow you to put in a comment or do some editing. So if you get into editing mode in your Google Doc, it will allow you to make a comment. So you can say, hey, I think we should eliminate this or add this. So you'll see my comments in there, and then maybe over the weekend we can kind of everybody try to see if they can get in on it. And if you can't, holler at me and I'll let you know. But I think we've got to start on it. There's, definitely work to do to sort of tidy up things. and make sure that we've got everything applied for. There's a whole section on equipment that doesn't apply to us whatsoever. So that's a big piece that's not even there. The budget and timeline shouldn't be that complicated. Budget wise shouldn't be, although I guess let's talk about that for a minute. If we have any sense, I know Ed, at one point you had said that the legal costs might be another $30,000-$40,000 or something. So I don't know if we know how that might break out. What kinds of things would that cover? If we can sort of figure that out a bit, because my thinking would be if the maximum is 300,000, you know, we can apply for 80% of the project cost. So if we said the project cost was 375, for example, reminding you that the LOI is 340,000. So if we added another 35,000 toward legal costs, then 300,000 gets us 80%, I believe, if my math is right. Which would then mean that the 20% match would be 75, 80,000, right? So that's kind of the numbers we're playing with, but I guess I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about what do we think is involved with the legal aspect. What kind of steps do we think we need, or how do we kind of figure that out? And then timeline 2, I'm wondering, Ed, if since you were involved in the original LOI, whether we should not reach out to the railroad and say, by the way, we're kind of thinking of activating this now. Is the offer still on the table? For sure. And are there other approvals that they have to go through on their side to reactivate anything? You know, whether that person who signed the LOI is even still there. I mean, all that kind of stuff. If we could reach out in the next week or so and find out what's anything going on their side that we need to be aware of, that would be my question, I guess.
Actually, I can probably find that out right through KP Law.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Any thoughts, Paul? I don't know if you've got any you know, ideas about what it might be to try to acquire this property that, you know, we're not thinking about here besides legal costs. I mean, or within the legal costs, what steps there might be that we might need to have, other kinds of approvals, or I don't know, anything.
I mean, the one that's above legal costs that I hadn't really thought of as being as expensive as it can be when I originally ballparked the 370 off to 340 a couple years back was, okay, are we going to have a survey done of this as a requirement of the Mass Trails grant? And what's that, you know, and Paul had gone through what that might cost us last time around. So I look at that as, you know, at or above the legal costs.
Right.
Can I just maybe we're overthinking some components in this particular step. And the reason why I say that is if you think about what rail banking is and how it's defined, I think that's a special type of category that the federal government applies to this section of railroad that has certain predefined right-of-way information, which might in return minimize the attorney costs because there might be less title search because given the special designation it has.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just being optimistic there, and maybe I'm full of it.
Nope.
But,
well, and that might be too why, you know, also touching base directly with the railroad would be probably a good idea too, though. I mean, just to find out that everything's still okay on their end. And Paul, I mentioned to you that I had heard via somewhere, the grapevine, way back whenever we had applied the first time for the grant, a grant for the railway acquisition, we got it, then we lost it for whatever reasons. And there was something, I know you were going to check with Attorney Adamski, who had been involved with looking at things, because I had been told that they weren't sure that the railroad even owned the entire stretch of land, which seems kind of odd to me, but I don't know if that was even true. So I don't know if we.
Who said that? I mean, I'm trying to understand the history. Where did this come from?
People that were involved early on in the first grant were not knowledgeable about the first grant that we had gotten. I guess it had been put forth like 6 years ago or something, and then the grant was canceled or returned, or I don't know exactly the story about it.
So
Ended. Yeah.
So how can Pioneer provide an agreement or a letter of intent?
Yeah.
If they
No,
don't own the property.
I don't know. And all I was told was Karen Adamski was the attorney that had been involved in that, and they were surprised to find that there were some sections of the railway that had problems in terms of the ownership. And maybe they were way ahead in terms of easement possibility, or I don't even know. I just wanted to be sure that, you know, we knew what we were getting into. But if we have any past history with her on file, that would be great. But
yeah,
just,
I reached out to her. I just haven't heard back from her yet. But
okay. Yeah, Ed, do you know anything?
I think Karen was on the Greenway Committee at one point.
Yeah.
she was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I don't know. If we hear from her, that's fine. But otherwise, so Ed, you want to reach out to both KP Law and the railroad? Is that what you're thinking, or?
I'm going to reach out to KP Law first, because they should be able to tell me, number one, from our side, how long that letter should be good for. They should also be able to tell me if there were any issues with the property ownership of the right of way or not. So then I'll go from there.
Okay.
And if it means, needing to reach out to the railroad, I can.
Yeah. I guess I would just want to be sure that the offer is still valid. So that would be my concern, and just to renew our conversation and dialogue with them, since it's been silent, obviously, for 2 or 3 years now. To not take anything for granted, I guess, that we should assume that it's good, but let's not, assume foolishly without double checking it, I guess, and spending our time on that. So, and I don't know how much.
What else are they going to do with it?
Huh? Say what?
What else are they going to do with it?
Yeah, well, I don't know. True. And I don't know, how much KP Law knows about rail banking too. So, I mean, whether they have to spend a lot of time going through it. That's why I was wondering if Karen could give us any insight on things too, in terms of the past history part, but certainly in terms of whether the letter is still valid, then yeah.
Yeah. Actually, when I got involved, it was KP Law that was actually dealing with the railroad and dealing with the letter and everything. So.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Didn't know that. Okay, so that's kind of where we are, and I think we've got to sort of figure out how to move forward. Today's the 7th. We've got until February 1st, but again, I'd rather get it in a bit ahead of time, because again, we don't know what it's going to take to manipulate this on the computer by the time we're done. But I didn't really want to be terribly directive and say, somebody do this section, somebody do that section. I think as we kind of all go through it and read it, if there's something that doesn't, make sense or whatever, I think we need to, try and put our comments in the editing or a separate email or something. But I think the edit function is there to exchange those ideas, right, Kate, for those of us that don't know Google Docs that well.
Yeah, I like the idea of dividing up the sections a little bit, just so that it's, I mean, I don't mind it being a little bit more prescriptive, just because we don't have that much time.
Yeah.
And so maybe if we each know what we're responsible for taking care of, it'll allow us to kind of focus on those sections.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what I might do then. I obviously with these couple of phone calls, I didn't get that far in terms of doing that. Let me over the next day or so, certainly by midday Saturday, go through and just sort of see where we've got information, what needs to be tightened up. Now, Paul, did you put in anything on that? There's coordinates in there about the the beginning of the line, the end of the line. Was that you, Kate, or was that Paul that put that in?
That was me.
That was you. Okay. Because it does ask for that kind of, the terminus and the GIS coordinates and stuff. And so the other question would be, well, let me finish that. So let me go through and see what's there and areas from my thought that need to be, done a little bit of research and fill in. And then I'll send a note around to everybody saying, okay, take a look at it. And I've kind of highlighted your names at certain areas or something, if that makes sense. I don't know. Is
Sure.
that okay?
So
Yeah.
the land and water conservation grant, the narrative that I wrote was really focused on what that grant asked for. And like, I spent a lot of time trying to tie it to the Massachusetts recreation plan, because that's kind of what it asked for.
Right.
I don't know if the Mass Trails really needs that as much. I mean, it might be helpful in the future.
Okay.
Because like I know I wrote some notes about how it directly related to the SCRP.
Yep. And
so maybe
the environmental justice part and all of that.
Oh
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
I mean, that was all really major focuses in the SCRP. I mean, even if it's not really truly appropriate for this grant, it might still be helpful in the future. So we can just save it.
Yeah, no, definitely not going anywhere, and absolutely save it. My thought would be that there may be, a few sentences here and there, though, in that one that do come in to help answer something else or strengthen our narrative or something. So let me try to sort of put the two a little bit together, and I'll plop that. I'll reshare that portion and just the sort of the descriptive part and see where we can do some editing. And there's where I think I'm going to ask Diana to help with some editing, because I know she's the one that can narrow down all the wordiness that we all have sometimes.
Would it be helpful to I know that you mentioned summarizing the feasibility study as part of that narrative. Like,
well, not the entire, I mean, not just the study, but I mean, if there are things to answer a particular question,
okay.
Yeah, so to find something in our feasibility studies or other documents that relate to that question and talk about it, rather than, just saying, oh yes, well, this is in our feasibility study. I mean, they don't want to go hunting for it. They want, the argument right there in front of them, basically, which only makes sense. And I guess the question I have, though, I think a lot of what we've taken here and there has been pretty close to verbatim from the various reports that we have from, the various studies or the open space plan, in a couple of cases I added, and things like that. So to the extent we do that a little bit, sort of verbatim, are we running into any issues with doing that? Are we plagiarizing ourselves? We technically own the documents, right?
I thought about that a lot. I kind of felt like, it's not like it's being graded like a school paper. I mean, it is, we are working towards the same project. So I didn't know how problematic it would be to reference the other documents.
We own the rights to it.
Yeah.
We paid for it. We
paid for it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Can't you quote it directly? You could use quotation marks. So
you can, but it might be a lot of quotes. I mean, that's
I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna tell us.
I think we could say, according to the feasibility study, blah blah blah, and then go from there without getting into trouble. Okay, that's fine.
That's what I did. Or like sometimes if I pulled a quote out of the SCORP, I would quote that because it's an external document.
Yeah.
Or if it's something that's not created by the feasibility study or something that directly pertains to this project, I did put quotes around it.
Okay, so something that is not a town type study, you would have done that differently. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. I guess I would like to see if we could get a good jump on this during the coming week, with the idea of maybe getting together in another 10 days or so to see where we are. How does that sound to everybody? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then with that in mind, if there are no other particular issues, I don't really want to go into other grant opportunities at this point in time. We've got some other ones that once we can get through this, we've got some other ones coming up for possibly March or something like that. I think the, who was the one? Was that the Rails to Trails one, Paul, that you just mentioned? I saw you sent me a note here somewhere.
I just sent a link to everybody in the chat function that has the benefits of rail banking.
Okay,
Halfway down the page or so, and it does talk about one of the large differences with the rail banking is the ease of, or actually the relief that the two parties have with respect to ownership, research, and the legal costs
okay,
are, as a result, less potentially due to the complexity not being there with the rail banking concept
okay,
as
all right,
defined in this
good,
document. Actually, this is a very good description of what rail
okay,
banking is.
that's great.
If,
That would be very helpful. Okay,
so
good,
hopefully
okay,
we get the same opinion from
sure. Yeah, right. Okay, good deal. All right, well, with that, that's good helpful information, I'm sure here, so good. So with the idea of getting together sometime in the next 10 days or so, let me just check where we are here.
What about the 18th? It's a Monday.
So Monday, I may have another meeting that night, depending. It's technically, is that a holiday? I forget.
It's a holiday.
That's
Oh, is
MLK
it?
Day? That's MLK Day, yeah.
Oh,
19th, we don't have select board. I could do it Tuesday, the 19th. Is anybody else got that
that
possibility?
works. That'll
That
still
was
give us
fun.
10 days
Yeah.
to get everything together.
Okay, let's aim for the same time on Tuesday, the 19th at 5:30. And in the meantime, I will go ahead and take a look at what we've got and send around some suggested questions to sort of everybody to kind of focus on, okay?
That's
Okay.
great.
Okay, well, let's give that a whirl. And is there anything else offhand? If not, could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn?
Okay, all in favor? Oh, sorry, I need a second first. Kate,
Second motion.
okay, all right, good, all in favor?
Aye.
Fowles eye.
Aye.
All
Gibson,
right.
aye.
All
Aye.
right, let's call us adjourned, and thanks, guys, appreciate it. And if you're having trouble with Google Docs, just let me know and I will do my best. I'm trying to be sure that it's there, but you should just focus on the Mass Trails folder, which has the draft application and the spreadsheet in it, and then a couple of the explanatory documents, okay? So,
Great.
Just one more thing.
Great.
I
yes,
uploaded
yep, Paul.
a bad version of the feasibility study that is.
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah,
no image. It's like 68 megs. It looks, I don't know if it looks like,
okay.
looks like you need glasses if you read it. But I don't
Yeah,
know if you guys want to use that or what, but I was able to get it down, but there's something corrupt with the original file, and I don't know if,
yeah.
you know.
Do we have a hard copy of it somewhere?
I have
the
a
community?
saved copy of it, but it's a big file.
Well, the hard copy would be looking the same way as it is now with its as an image. Well, I uploaded it to one of the folders that's
Okay.
in there. So I don't know
Okay, we'll
if you
take a
wanna
look
just
at
take
that.
a look Yeah.
Sure. Okay, we'll take a look and see. Yeah, no, the folder was, when I tried to share it before and send it, it was just a massive file. It was impossible to do. And that's why maybe if it's got some corrupt files in it, that's part of the problem. So yeah, we'll have to figure out what we can use. And, even if we have that old, bigger file, to put it in Dropbox, it still might be doable rather than trying to attach it, as a PDF, for example. Okay, good. Well, thanks, guys. Let's call it quits. And the meeting is hereby adjourned, sort of 6:25-ish. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.